I married my father's friend. I was stunned when I saw what he started doing on our first wedding night. Welcome to the channel. Enjoy the video. Give it a like. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Comment and share. The glittering skyline of New York City sparkled like a treasure chest of diamonds against the velvet night sky. Emily Carter stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her luxurious penthouse apartment, a glass of chilled champagne in her hand, its bubbles mirroring the twinkling lights of the city below. The cool press of her platinum wedding band against the crystal flute served as a constant reminder of her recent marriage to Michael Thompson, a man whose charm and mystery had swept her off her feet just 6 months ago. At 32, Emily had it all, or so it seemed. A respected history professor at Columbia University, she now found herself thrust into a world of opulence and extravagance that she had only read about in her textbooks. The transition from her modest upbringing to this life of luxury had been dizzying, to say the least. Admiring the view again? Darling, Michael's deep voice startled her from her reverie. She turned to see her husband leaning against the doorframe, his tailored suit accentuating his fit physique. At 48, Michael exuded an aura of success and power that both thrilled and intimidated Emily. "It never gets old," she replied, smiling as he crossed the room to join her. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is our home." Michael wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "You deserve all this and more, Emily. I'm just the lucky man who gets to give it to you." As Emily leaned into his embrace, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that had been growing in the pit of her stomach. Despite the whirlwind romance and fairy tale wedding, there was still so much about Michael that remained a mystery. His frequent business trips, the late-night phone calls he took in hushed tones, the way he skillfully deflected questions about his past, it all added up to a puzzle that Emily couldn't quite solve. "Are you sure you have to leave for London tomorrow?" she asked, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "We've barely had any time together since the charity gala last week." Michael's grip tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry, love. You know how it is with these high-stakes deals. Millions of dollars on the line, investors to please. But I promise, when I get back, we'll take that trip to the Maldives we've been talking about. Just you, me, and a private beach." Emily nodded, forcing a smile. She knew better than to press further. Michael's work in international finance was demanding, and she had accepted early on that it would mean sacrifices in their personal life. Still, she couldn't help but wonder what exactly these deals entailed that required such secrecy and frequent travel. As if sensing her thoughts, Michael gently turned her to face him. "Hey," he said softly, cupping her face in his hands. "I know this isn't easy, but trust me, everything I do for us, for our future." Emily searched his eyes, those deep blue pools that had first captured her heart. She wanted desperately to believe him, to silence the doubts that whispered in the back of her mind. "I know," she whispered back, leaning in to kiss him. The next morning, Emily woke to an empty bed and a note on Michael's pillow. "Early flight. Didn't want to wake you. I love you, Em," she sighed, running her fingers over his neat handwriting. Another week alone in this gilded cage. As she went about her morning routine, Emily's phone buzzed with a message from her best friend, Sarah Mitchell. "Lunch today. Got some interesting info to share. The usual spot at 1. Emily's curiosity piqued. Sarah, a tenacious investigative journalist, always had her ear to the ground for the latest scoop. "Wouldn't miss it? See you then," she typed back. Little did Emily know that this lunch would be the first domino to fall in a series of events that would shatter the carefully constructed facade of her perfect life. As she stepped out of her building into the bustling streets of New York, the weight of unspoken secrets hung in the air like the heavy summer heat, promising a storm on the horizon. The sleek black Audi that Michael had insisted she use purred to life as Emily slid into the driver's seat. As she navigated through the crowded streets, her mind wandered to the life she had left behind, the modest apartment, the student loans, the simple pleasures. Now, surrounded by luxury and wealth, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of nostalgia for those simpler times. Arriving at the upscale bistro where she was meeting Sarah, Emily handed her keys to the valet, smoothing down her designer dress as she stepped onto the sidewalk. The maitre d' recognized her immediately, ushering her to a secluded table on the terrace, where Sarah was already waiting, a gleam of excitement in her eyes. "Em, you won't believe what I've uncovered," Sarah exclaimed as Emily took her seat. The waiter appeared instantly, pouring sparkling water into crystal glasses. "Slow down, Sarah," Emily laughed, though her heart rate had already begun to quicken. "At least let me order my salad first." As they perused the menu, filled with dishes whose prices would have once made Emily balk, she couldn't help but notice Sarah's barely contained energy. Whatever her friend had discovered, it was big. Once their orders were placed, and they were alone again, Sarah leaned in, her voice low. "Remember that story I was working on about corporate espionage in the finance world?" Emily nodded, recalling Sarah's excitement about the potential breakthrough in her career. "Well, I've stumbled onto something much bigger," Sarah continued, her eyes darting around to ensure no one was listening. "We're talking billions of dollars, international players, and some very familiar names in New York's elite circles." A chill ran down Emily's spine, though she couldn't explain why. "What kind of familiar names?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then said, "I can't reveal too much yet, but, Emily, has Michael ever mentioned anyone named Ethan Parker?" The name hit Emily like a bolt of lightning. She had heard Michael mention it once. In a heated phone conversation he thought she couldn't hear. I think so. Why?" Sarah's expression turned grave. "Because Ethan Parker is at the center of this whole thing, and from what I've gathered, he has connections to some very powerful people in this city. People who might be closer to you than you think." As the waiter returned with their meals, Emily's appetite had vanished. She stared at her expertly arranged salad, her mind racing. What was Michael's connection to Ethan Parker? And why did she have the sinking feeling that her comfortable world was about to be turned upside down? "Emily," Sarah said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze her friend's hand. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I need you to be prepared. The story I'm working on, it could change everything. And I have a feeling you might be more involved than you realize." As the New York summer sun beat down on the terrace, Emily felt a cold sweat break out on her skin. The glittering facade of her new life suddenly seemed as fragile as a house of cards, ready to collapse at the slightest breath of truth. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would test her love, her loyalty, and everything she thought she knew about herself and those closest to her. As she looked into Sarah's determined eyes, Emily realized that the price of truth might be higher than she ever imagined, but it was a price she would have to pay. The rest of Emily's lunch with Sarah passed in a blur of half-heard conversations and uneaten food. As she made her way back to her Audi, Sarah's words echoed in her mind, mixing with the cacophony of New York City traffic. The name Ethan Parker seemed to pulse in her consciousness, a discordant note in the symphony of her carefully orchestrated life. Back in the penthouse, Emily found herself unable to focus on her lesson plans for the upcoming semester. Instead, she paced the expansive living room, her heels clicking against the marble floors that had once filled her with awe, but now felt cold and unyielding beneath her feet. Unable to shake the growing unease, Emily made a decision. She walked purposefully to Michael's home office, a room she rarely entered out of respect for his privacy. The mahogany door swung open silently, revealing a space that was both familiar and foreign. The scent of Michael's cologne lingered in the air, mingling with the rich aroma of leather from his executive chair. Emily's eyes swept across the room, taking in the wall of awards and the shelves lined with financial tomes. Everything spoke of success, power, and wealth. But now, for the first time, she looked at it all with a critical eye. What secrets lay hidden behind this facade of achievement? Her gaze fell on Michael's desk, its surface clear except for a single photo frame, a picture of them on their wedding day. Emily picked it up, studying their smiling faces. She had been so happy, so sure of their love. Now, doubt crept in like a slow-rising tide. Setting the frame down, Emily noticed the edge of a document peeking out from beneath the desk blotter. Her heart racing, she gently tugged it free. It was a financial statement, filled with numbers that made her head spin, but one name jumped out at her. Ethan Parker Investments, LLC. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Here was tangible proof of a connection between Michael and the man Sarah had mentioned. But what did it mean? She quickly snapped a photo of the document with her phone before carefully replacing it exactly as she had found it. As she left the office, closing the door behind her, Emily felt as though she had crossed an invisible line. The weight of her discovery pressed down on her, a secret she now carried alone. The The rest of the week passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Emily taught her classes, attended faculty meetings, and tried to ignore the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. Michael called every night from London, his voice warm and full of promises for their future. But now Emily found herself analyzing every word, searching for hidden meanings or slip-ups that might reveal the truth. On Friday afternoon, as Emily was leaving her last class of the day, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the Bethesda Fountain in Central Park, 7 p.m. Come alone. R." Emily's heart raced. She knew only one person whose name started with R who would contact her like this: her father, Robert Carter. But why the secrecy? Robert had always been a pillar of respectability in their community, a successful businessman known for his integrity and philanthropy. What could be so urgent and so clandestine that he would reach out to her this way? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Emily found herself approaching the iconic fountain. The usual crowds of tourists had thinned, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by the gentle splash of water. She spotted her father sitting on a bench, his silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. "Dad?" Emily called softly as she approached. Robert looked up, his face a mask of concern and something else, fear. "Emily, sweetheart," he said, standing to embrace her. "I'm sorry for the cloak and dagger routine, but I needed to speak with you away from prying eyes and ears." Emily's concern deepened. "Dad, what's going on? You're scaring me." Robert glanced around before leading Emily to a more secluded spot near the fountain. "I received a visit from some associates yesterday. They were asking questions about Michael, about his business dealings." Emily felt her world tilt slightly. What kind of questions? What associates? Robert's voice dropped to a whisper. "Ty isn't the kind of associates you don't say no to, Emily. I've known for a while that Michael's work isn't entirely what it seems, but I had no idea how deep it went. There are powerful people involved, dangerous people." "Dad, you're not making any sense," Emily protested, though a part of her knew exactly what he was implying. "Michael is a financial advisor. He manages investments for wealthy clients, that's all." Robert shook his head sadly. "I wish that were true, sweetheart. But Michael's involved in something much bigger, much more dangerous. And now I'm afraid you might be in danger too." Emily's mind raced, trying to reconcile the man she loved with the shadowy figure her father was describing. "How do you know all this? And why are you only telling me now?" Robert's eyes filled with regret. "Because, Emily, I'm not as innocent in all this as I've led you to believe. Years ago, I made some choices I'm not proud of. And those choices have come back to haunt us all." As the truth of her father's words sank in, Emily felt as though the ground beneath her feet had turned to quicksand. Everything she thought she knew about her husband, her father, her very life, was crumbling around her. "There's more," Robert continued, his voice heavy with the weight of his confession. "Ethan Parker. I assume you've heard the name by now. He's not just Michael's business associate. He's a key player in an international network of, well, let's call it alternative finance, money laundering, offshore accounts, the works. And Michael, he's been Ethan's right-hand man for years." Emily felt as though she had been plunged into icy water. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "No, that can't be true. Michael wouldn't. He couldn't." Robert placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I never wanted you to be caught up in this. When Michael came into your life, I prayed that he was trying to leave that world behind. But recent events have made it clear that he's in deeper than ever." Tears stung Emily's eyes as the full implications of her father's words hit her. "What am I supposed to do now, Dad? If what you're saying is true, then my entire marriage has been a lie. Everything I thought I knew about Michael." "Listen to me carefully," Robert said, his voice urgent. "You need to be very careful from now on. Don't confront Michael. Don't let on that you know anything. We need to figure out how to get you out of this safely." As the last light faded from the sky, Emily felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice. Behind her lay the comfortable, luxurious life she had known. Before her stretched an unknown future, fraught with danger and deception. "There's one more thing," Robert added, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, nondescript flash drive. "This contains information that could bring down Ethan's entire operation and implicate some very powerful people in the process. I'm entrusting it to you. Hide it somewhere safe, somewhere Michael would never think to look. Emily took the flash drive with trembling hands, the small device suddenly feeling as heavy as the weight of the secrets it contained. As she slipped it into her purse, she realized that this moment marked a point of no return. Whatever came next, her life would never be the same. As Emily and Robert parted ways, the Bethesda angel looming above them seemed to watch with sorrowful eyes, a silent witness to the unraveling of a family's truth. Emily walked back through the darkening park, each step taking her further from the life she had known and closer to an uncertain future. Her phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Just landed. Can't wait to see you, darling. I have a surprise for you." Emily stared at the message, her husband's words now carrying a double meaning she couldn't ignore. As she emerged from the park onto the bustling streets of New York, the city's glittering skyline no longer seemed magical. Instead, it loomed ominously, a gilded cage that held secrets darker than she could have ever imagined. With a deep breath, Emily steeled herself for what was to come. She was no longer just Emily Carter, the history professor living a fairy tale life. She was now a woman with a mission, carrying secrets that could topple empires of wealth and power. As she hailed a taxi to take her home, Emily knew that the real test of her strength and courage was only just beginning. The penthouse was shrouded in shadows when Emily returned, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, her mind reeling from the revelations of the day. The flash drive her father had given her felt like a ticking time bomb in her purse. Emily's eyes darted around the luxurious space, searching for a hiding place. Every surface, every decorative object now seemed suspect. Finally, her gaze settled on an antique book on the shelf, a first edition of The Great Gatsby that Michael had gifted her on their first anniversary. With trembling hands, she carefully hollowed out a few pages in the center of the book, creating a perfect nook for the flash drive. As she slid the book back into place, she couldn't help but appreciate the irony of hiding secrets of wealth and corruption within Fitzgerald's critique of the American dream. The sound of a key in the lock made Emily's heart race. She quickly composed herself, plastering on a smile as Michael walked in, his arms laden with shopping bags from high-end boutiques. "Darling." "I'm home," Michael called out, his voice echoing through the apartment. "Come see what I've brought you from London." Emily steeled herself, drawing on every ounce of her strength to act normal. She walked into the foyer, where Michael greeted her with a passionate kiss. "I've missed you," he murmured against her lips. "I've missed you too," Emily replied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She forced enthusiasm into her voice as Michael began pulling out gifts. A stunning diamond necklace, designer shoes, and a couture dress. "For the charity gala next week," Michael explained, holding up the shimmering gown. "I want my beautiful wife to outshine everyone there." As Emily admired the gifts, her mind raced. The charity gala, of course. It was one of the biggest events of the New York social calendar, attended by the city's wealthiest and most influential. If what her father had said was true, it would be the perfect cover for whatever dealings Michael and Ethan Parker were involved in. "It's all wonderful, Michael." "Thank you," Emily said, leaning in to kiss him on the cheek. "I'm just going to freshen up before dinner. Why don't you open a bottle of wine?" In the safety of their ensuite bathroom, Emily finally let her mask slip. She gripped the marble countertop, her knuckles turning white as she stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger. Perfectly coiffed hair, designer clothes, a face carefully made up to hide the turmoil beneath. How had she become this person? Over the next few days, Emily found herself living a double life. On the surface, she was the perfect wife, attentive, loving, excited about the upcoming gala. But beneath it all, she was constantly on edge, watching Michael's every move, analyzing his every word for hidden meanings. She also began her own covert investigation. While Michael was at work, Emily carefully combed through his office, photographing documents and noting down names and dates. She created a secure email account and sent encrypted messages to Sarah, sharing what she had found and asking her friend to dig deeper into Ethan Parker's business dealings. As the day of the gala approached, the tension in Emily's chest grew tighter. She knew that whatever was going to happen, it would likely come to a head at this event. The night before, as she lay awake next to a peacefully sleeping Michael, Emily made a decision. She couldn't just stand by and let things unfold. She needed to take action. The evening of the gala arrived, and the penthouse was a flurry of activity. Emily slipped into the gown Michael had bought her, its fabric shimmering like liquid gold against her skin. As she fastened the diamond necklace around her throat, she couldn't help but wonder if it had been paid for with dirty money. "You look absolutely stunning," Michael said, appearing in the doorway in his tuxedo. His eyes roamed appreciatively over her figure. "Every man at the gala will be envious of me tonight." Emily smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Shall we go? We don't want to be late." The limousine ride to the gala was filled with tense silence, at least on Emily's part. Michael, oblivious to her inner turmoil, chatted excitedly about the people they would meet and the connections he hoped to make. As they pulled up to the opulent venue, Emily took a deep breath. "Here we go," she murmured to herself, stepping out onto the red carpet. The ballroom was a vision of luxury and excess. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the crowd of New York's elite, their jewels and designer outfits creating a dazzling display of wealth. Emily scanned the room, her eyes finally landing on a familiar face, Sarah, who had managed to secure a press pass for the event. Their eyes met across the room, and Sarah gave an almost imperceptible nod. Whatever was going to happen tonight, at least Emily knew she wasn't alone. "Emily, darling, there's someone I'd like you to meet," Michael said, guiding her through the crowd with a hand on the small of her back. Emily's heart rate quickened as they approached a distinguished-looking man in his 50s. "Emily, this is Ethan Parker," Michael introduced, his voice filled with a deference Emily had never heard before. "Ethan, my wife, Emily." Ethan Parker's handshake was firm, his smile not quite reaching his steel-grey eyes. "A pleasure to finally meet you, Emily. I've heard so much about you." Emily forced herself to smile back, even as her mind raced. This was the man at the center of it all, the puppet master pulling the strings of her husband's secret life. "Likewise, Mr. Parker. I hope all you've heard has been good." Ethan chuckled, a sound that sent chills down Emily's spine. "Please, call me Ethan. And yes, Michael speaks of you with nothing but adoration. You must be quite something to have captured the heart of my most valuable associate." The way Ethan emphasized the word associate made it clear that Michael was much more than that. Emily's suspicions were confirmed. Whatever was going on, Ethan Parker was at the heart of it. As the evening wore on, Emily found herself constantly on edge. She watched as Michael and Ethan circulated the room, engaging in hushed conversations with various high-profile guests. Every now and then, she would catch a glimpse of Sarah, who was clearly doing her best to eavesdrop on these interactions without being noticed. During a lull in the festivities, Emily excused herself and made her way to the powder room. As she was touching up her lipstick, the door opened, and Sarah slipped inside. "Emily," Sarah whispered urgently, "I've overheard something big. There's a deal going down tonight, right here at the gala. Millions of dollars changing hands, and it's definitely not legal." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. "What should we do? Should we call the police?" Sarah shook her head. "Not yet. We need more concrete evidence. But listen, I have a plan. I need you to create a distraction in about 10 minutes. Can you do that?" Emily nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "I'll figure something out. Be careful, Sarah." As Emily re-entered the ballroom, she spotted Michael deep in conversation with Ethan and a group of men she didn't recognize. Their body language was tense, secretive. This was it. Whatever deal Sarah had overheard was likely happening right now. Taking a deep breath, Emily made her way to the center of the room. She picked up a champagne flute from a passing waiter and, with a silent apology to the hosting committee, deliberately tripped, sending the champagne flying across her golden gown. The gasp that went up from the crowd was exactly what she had hoped for. All eyes turned to her, including Michael's and Ethan's. As Michael rushed to her side, fussing over her ruined dress, Emily caught a glimpse of Sarah slipping into the hallway that led to the private rooms of the venue. "I'm so clumsy," Emily laughed, playing up her embarrassment. "I think I need to go freshen up." As Michael led her towards the powder room, Emily's mind was racing. What would Sarah find? And more importantly, how would it change everything she thought she knew about her life? Little did she know, the events set in motion that night would lead to revelations far beyond anything she could have imagined. The glittering world of wealth and power she had been living in was about to shatter, and Emily would soon find herself at the center of a storm that threatened to sweep away everything and everyone she held dear. The rest of the gala passed in a blur of forced smiles and stilted conversations. Emily's mind was elsewhere, wondering what Sarah might have discovered. As the evening wound down, she found herself scanning the crowd for her friend, but Sarah was nowhere to be seen. "Ready to head home, darling?" Michael's voice startled her from her thoughts. His hand on her lower back felt heavy, almost oppressive. "Yes, of course," Emily replied, mustering a tired smile. "It's been quite an evening." As they made their way to the exit, Emily caught sight of Ethan Parker in an intense discussion with two men she didn't recognize. Their hushed tones and furtive glances set off alarm bells in her mind. The ride home was filled with Michael's excited chatter about the connections he'd made and the deals he'd discussed. Emily nodded and smiled at appropriate intervals, all the while feeling as though she was suffocating in the plush interior of their limousine. Once back in their penthouse, Emily excused herself to remove her makeup and change out of her stained gown. In the sanctuary of their marble bathroom, she finally let out a shaky breath, gripping the edge of the sink as she stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed miles away from the naive professor who had fallen in love with Michael Thompson. A soft ping from her phone broke the silence. It was a message from Sarah. "We need to talk tomorrow, 10 a.m., our usual spot. It's worse than we thought." Emily's heart raced as she deleted the message, her fingers trembling slightly. Whatever Sarah had uncovered, it was clear that their lives were about to change dramatically. The next morning, Emily woke early, her sleep having been fitful and filled with unsettling dreams. She dressed carefully, choosing a casual outfit that wouldn't draw attention. As she prepared to leave, Michael emerged from his home office, a concerned look on his face. "Early meeting at the university?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. Emily forced a smile. "Yes, curriculum planning for the new semester. It might run long, so don't wait on me for lunch." Michael nodded, seemingly satisfied with her explanation. As Emily headed for the door, he called out, "Oh, and darling, don't forget we have dinner with the Parkers tonight. Ethan's wife is excited to meet you." The reminder felt like a punch to the gut, but Emily maintained her composure. "Of course. I'll be back in time to get ready." The bustling cafe where she was meeting Sarah felt worlds away from the opulent gala of the night before. As Emily slid into a booth across from her friend, she was struck by the tension evident in Sarah's posture. "What did you find?" Emily asked without preamble, her voice low. Sarah glanced around before leaning in close. "It's big, Em. Really big. We're talking international money laundering, insider trading, even connections to arms dealing. Your husband, Ethan Parker, and at least a dozen other high-profile individuals are all involved." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. "Are you sure? Do you have proof?" Sarah nodded grimly. "Enough to bring down empires. I managed to clone a phone last night. Don't ask me how. The information on it. Emily, it's explosive, but it also means we're in danger. These people, they won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens their operation." The gravity of the situation settled over Emily like a heavy cloak. "What do we do now?" "We need to be smart about this," Sarah replied, her journalist instincts clearly kicking in. "I have contacts in the FBI who specialize in white-collar crime, but before we go to them, we need to gather more concrete evidence. And you, Emily, you're our best chance at getting it." Emily's eyes widened. "Me? What can I do?" Sarah's expression was a mix of determination and concern. "You have access to Michael's home office, his personal devices. If we can find a paper trail, emails, anything that corroborates what's on this phone, we'll have an airtight case." The weight of what Sarah was asking settled onto Emily's shoulders. She would have to spy on her own husband, potentially putting herself in harm's way. But as she thought about the magnitude of the crimes involved, she knew she had no choice. "Okay," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it, but we need to be careful. If Michael or Ethan suspect anything." Sarah reached across the table, squeezing Emily's hand reassuringly. "We'll be careful, and Emily, remember, you're not alone in this." As they parted ways, Emily felt as though she was standing on the edge of a precipice. The life she had known, the love she had believed in, it was all balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move, and everything would come crashing down. The rest of the day passed in a haze of anxiety and anticipation. Emily went through the motions of her usual routine, all the while hyper-aware of every sound, every potential sign that her secret had been discovered. As evening approached, she began preparing for the dinner with the Parkers. Every swipe of mascara, every curl of her hair felt like another layer of deception. The woman staring back at her from the mirror was a stranger, a spy in her own home, about to sit across the dinner table from people involved in international crimes. Michael appeared in the doorway of their bedroom, adjusting his tie. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes roaming appreciatively over her figure in the sleek black dress she'd chosen. Emily smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "Thank you. Shall we go?" The drive to the Parkers' mansion in the Hamptons was filled with tense silence, at least on Emily's part. Michael, oblivious to her inner turmoil, chatted about work and their plans for an upcoming vacation. Each word felt like another betrayal, another lie in a relationship that Emily now realized had been built on deception from the start. As they pulled up to the imposing gates of the Parker estate, Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The mansion that loomed before them was a testament to the kind of wealth that came from more than just savvy business deals. It screamed of money gained through less than legal means. Ethan Parker greeted them at the door, his wife Vivian by his side. Emily studied the woman carefully, wondering how much she knew about her husband's illicit activities. Vivian Parker was the epitome of a trophy wife, beautiful, charming, and utterly devoted to maintaining their social status. "Emily, dear, we're so glad you could join us," Vivian gushed, air-kissing Emily's cheeks. "I've been dying to get to know the woman who finally tamed Michael Thompson." As they moved into the opulent living room, Emily's eyes darted around, taking in every detail. Priceless artworks adorned the walls, and she couldn't help but wonder if they were purchased with laundered money. The crystal glasses that Ethan used to pour them each a measure of expensive scotch probably cost more than what some people made in a month. "A toast," Ethan proposed, raising his glass. "To new friends and prosperous ventures." The word sent a chill down Emily's spine, but she raised her glass along with the others, forcing a smile onto her face. As she sipped the smoky liquid, she couldn't help but feel that she was drinking to the destruction of her own world. Dinner was a lavish affair, each course more extravagant than the last. Emily picked at her food, her appetite diminished by the knowledge of what lay beneath the surface of this display of wealth and refinement. She watched as Michael and Ethan exchanged knowing glances, their conversation peppered with veiled references that she now understood held deeper, darker meanings. As the evening wore on, Emily excused herself to use the powder room. In the hallway, she paused, hearing hushed voices coming from behind a partially open door. Curiosity overrode her caution, and she inched closer, straining to hear. "The shipment arrives next week." Ethan's voice drifted out. "Make sure everything is in place. We can't afford any slip-ups, not with the feds sniffing around." "Don't worry," Michael replied, his tone serious. "I've taken care of everything. By this time next month, we'll be 50 million richer, and no one will be the wiser." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, concrete evidence of their illegal activities. But before she could process what she'd heard, a floorboard creaked beneath her feet. The voices inside the room fell silent. Panicking, Emily quickly ducked into the powder room, her mind racing. She had just confirmed her worst fears, but at what cost had they heard her? As she stared at her pale reflection in the ornate mirror, Emily realized that the game had changed. She was no longer just an unwitting bystander. She was now actively involved in uncovering a criminal conspiracy. And if Michael and Ethan discovered what she knew, her life might be in very real danger. Emily's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the ornate sink in the Parkers' powder room. The overheard conversation echoed in her mind, each word feeling like another nail in the coffin of her marriage and the life she thought she knew. Taking a deep breath, she splashed cold water on her face, careful not to smudge her makeup, and steeled herself to return to the dinner party. As she re-entered the dining room, Emily felt the weight of Michael's gaze on her. Had he noticed her absence? Did he suspect? She forced a smile, sliding back into her seat beside him. "Everything all right, darling?" Michael asked, his tone casual, but his eyes searching. "Of course," Emily replied, reaching for her wine glass to steady her nerves, just freshening up. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and stilted conversation. Emily felt like an actress in a high-stakes play, every word and gesture carefully calculated. As they bid their goodbyes to the Parkers, Ethan's handshake lingered a moment too long, his steel-grey eyes boring into hers as if trying to read her thoughts. The drive back to their penthouse was silent, the tension palpable. Emily stared out the window at the glittering New York skyline, each twinkling light now seeming like a mocking reminder of the wealth built on lies and crime that surrounded her. Once home, Michael loosened his tie and poured himself a generous measure of scotch. "Nightcap," he offered, holding up a second glass. Emily shook her head. "No, thank you. I think I'll turn in early. It's been a long day." Michael's eyebrows furrowed slightly. "Are you sure you're all right, Em? You've seemed distracted lately." For a moment, Emily considered coming clean, laying all her cards on the table and confronting Michael about everything she'd learned. But the memory of the conversation she'd overheard held her back. The stakes were too high, the danger too real. "I'm fine," she assured him, mustering a tired smile. "Just stressed about the new semester starting soon. You know how it is." Michael nodded, seemingly satisfied with her explanation. As Emily retreated to their bedroom, she could feel his eyes on her back, and she wondered if he could sense the shift in her, the newfound knowledge that lay between them like an invisible wall. Sleep eluded Emily that night. She lay awake, listening to Michael's steady breathing beside her, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. By the time dawn broke, she had made a decision. She needed to act, and fast. The next morning, Emily rose early, careful not to wake Michael. She dressed quickly and quietly, grabbing her laptop and phone before slipping out of the penthouse. The city was just beginning to stir as she made her way to a small cafe several blocks away, one she knew Michael never frequented. Once settled in a corner booth with a strong coffee, Emily pulled out her phone and dialed Sarah's number. "Em, what's wrong?" Sarah's voice was thick with sleep. "I need your help," Emily said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one was within earshot. "I overheard something last night. It's worse than we thought, Sarah. Much worse." As Emily recounted the conversation she'd overheard between Michael and Ethan, she could hear Sarah's sharp intake of breath. "This is big, Em," Sarah said, her journalist instincts clearly kicking in. "We need to move fast. I'll contact my source at the FBI, but we need more concrete evidence. Can you get into Michael's office, his computer?" Emily hesitated. The thought of actively spying on her husband made her stomach churn. But she knew it was necessary. "I think so. He has a meeting this afternoon. I could try then." "Good," Sarah replied. "Be careful, Em. And remember, you're doing the right thing. These men need to be stopped." As Emily ended the call, she felt a mix of determination and fear wash over her. She was about to cross a line, one that would forever change the course of her life. But as she thought about the magnitude of the crimes Michael and Ethan were involved in, she knew she had no choice. Returning to the penthouse, Emily found Michael already gone, a note on the kitchen counter informing her he had an early meeting. She breathed a sigh of relief, grateful for the reprieve from having to maintain her facade. The hours ticked by slowly as Emily waited for Michael to leave for his afternoon meeting. When she finally heard the front door close, she waited an additional 10 minutes before approaching his home office. Her heart pounded as she turned the doorknob, half expecting alarms to blare or Michael to suddenly reappear. But the room remained silent as she entered, the plush carpet muffling her footsteps. Michael's desk, a massive mahogany piece that dominated the room, loomed before her like a challenge. Emily sat in his leather chair, the material creaking slightly under her weight, and booted up his computer. A password prompt appeared on the screen, and Emily felt a moment of panic. Then she remembered, on their honeymoon, in a moment of playful intimacy, Michael had shared his password with her. "It's a combination of your birthday and the day we met," he had said, his eyes twinkling with love. The memory now felt like a knife twisting in her heart. With trembling fingers, Emily typed in the password. The computer unlocked, granting her access to Michael's digital world. She inserted a flash drive Sarah had given her, which contained software designed to copy and decrypt files without leaving a trace. As the software worked its magic, Emily's eyes scanned the room, taking in details she had never paid much attention to before. The wall of awards and accolades now seemed like a mockery, each plaque and trophy a testament to success built on deceit and crime. Her gaze fell on a framed photo on the desk, a picture of her and Michael on their wedding day. She was beaming at the camera, her face radiant with joy and love. Michael's arm was around her waist, his smile confident and charming. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. Had any of it been real? Or had she just been a convenient cover for his illicit activities? The computer chimed softly, indicating that the file transfer was complete. Emily quickly removed the flash drive and shut down the computer, ensuring everything was exactly as she had found it. As she stood to leave, her elbow knocked against a drawer, causing it to slide open slightly. Something caught her eye, the corner of an envelope peeking out from beneath some papers. Acting on instinct, Emily pulled it out. Inside, she found a series of photographs that made her blood run cold. They were surveillance photos of her, at the university, meeting Sarah for coffee, even jogging in the park. With shaking hands, she turned over one of the photos. On the back, in unfamiliar handwriting, was a note. Insurance. Use if necessary. The implications hit Emily like a physical blow. Not only was Michael involved in criminal activities, but he had been keeping tabs on her, perhaps suspecting her growing doubts. The man she had married, the man she had loved, was truly a stranger. Just then, she heard the unmistakable sound of a key in the front door lock. Michael was home early. Panic surged through Emily as she hastily shoved the envelope back into the drawer and rushed out of the office. She had just made it to the living room, heart pounding, when Michael walked in. "Emily," he called out, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing home?" Emily forced a smile, praying that her face didn't betray the turmoil within. "I wasn't feeling well, so I cancelled my afternoon classes," she lied smoothly. "How was your meeting?" As Michael launched into a detailed account of his day, Emily nodded and smiled at appropriate intervals, all the while feeling as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice. The flash drive in her pocket felt like it weighed a ton. Its contents potentially explosive enough to bring down not just Michael and Ethan, but an entire network of white-collar criminals. That night, as she lay awake next to Michael, Emily made a decision. She couldn't continue like this, living a lie, sleeping next to a man who had betrayed not just her, but the very principles of law and decency. Tomorrow, she would meet with Sarah and her FBI contact. It was time to bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. Little did Emily know, her actions had not gone unnoticed. In the shadows of the city's underbelly, wheels were already in motion. Wheels that would soon threaten not just her marriage and her way of life, but her very survival. The game was about to change, and Emily would need every ounce of her courage and wit to make it through the storm that was coming. The dawn broke over New York City, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold that seemed at odds with the turmoil in Emily's heart. She had barely slept, the weight of her discoveries and the decision she had made keeping her awake through the long hours of the night. As she sipped her morning coffee, watching Michael prepare for work with his usual efficiency, Emily felt as though she were watching a stranger. The man before her, straightening his tie and checking his expensive watch, was not the loving husband she thought she knew, but a criminal hiding behind a facade of respectability. "I have a late meeting tonight," Michael said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Don't wait up." Emily nodded, forcing a smile. "Be safe," she replied, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. As soon as Michael left, Emily sprang into action. She called Sarah, her voice low and urgent. "We need to meet. Now. Bring your FBI contact." An hour later, Emily found herself in a nondescript cafe in a quiet part of town, sitting across from Sarah and a stern-faced man who introduced himself only as Agent Thompson. "Mrs. Carter," Agent Thompson began, his voice grave, "I understand you have information regarding the illegal activities of your husband, Michael Thompson, and his associate, Ethan Parker." Emily took a deep breath and began to recount everything she had discovered, the overheard conversations, the suspicious meetings, and the damning evidence she had found on Michael's computer. As she spoke, she could see the agent's expression growing more serious. "This is more extensive than we initially thought," he said when she finished. "Mrs. Carter, I won't sugarcoat this. What you're doing is incredibly dangerous. These men have resources and connections that make them formidable opponents." "I understand the risks," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "But I can't stand by and let this continue. What do you need me to do?" Agent Thompson leaned forward, his voice low. "We need concrete evidence to bring charges. The information you've provided is a start, but we need more. Specifically, we need access to the financial records that detail their transactions. Emily's mind raced. There's a safe in Michael's office, she said slowly. I've never seen inside it, but I'm almost certain that's where he keeps his most sensitive documents. Can you get into it? Sarah asked, her eyes wide. Emily hesitated. I think so. Michael once mentioned that the combination was something I would know. I always thought it was sweet, but now, it's our best shot, Agent Thompson interjected. Mrs. Carter, I know we're asking a lot, but if you can get those documents, we can put an end to this operation and bring these men to justice. Emily nodded, a sense of resolve settling over her. I'll do it. Tonight, when Michael's at his meeting. As she left the cafe, Emily felt as though she were walking into the eye of a storm. The city around her continued its usual bustle, oblivious to the high-stakes drama unfolding in its midst. That evening, after Michael left for his meeting, Emily waited an extra half-hour before entering his office. The safe loomed before her, its sleek metal surface reflecting the dim light. Emily's hands trembled as she approached it, her mind racing through possible combinations. Their anniversary date. No, her birthday. Tried that too. Then, a memory surfaced. Their first date. A picnic in Central Park. Michael had been so nervous he'd spilled wine on her dress. The date, 04/22, was seared into her memory. With bated breath, Emily entered the numbers. There was a moment of agonizing silence. Then a soft click. The safe swung open. Inside, she found stacks of documents, USB drives, and bundles of cash. Her hands shaking, Emily began to photograph everything, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure someone would hear it. She was so engrossed in her task that she almost missed the sound of the front door opening. Panic surged through her as she heard Michael's voice, followed by another she recognized as Ethan's. Quickly, Emily closed the safe and slipped out of the office. She had just made it to the hallway when Michael rounded the corner. "Emily?" he said, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing up?" I couldn't sleep," she stammered, her mind racing for an excuse. "So I was just getting some water." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, but before he could respond, Ethan appeared behind him. "Ah, the lovely Mrs. Thompson," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I hope we didn't wake you." Emily forced a smile. "Not at all. I'll leave you gentlemen to your business." As she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something in Ethan's hand, a gun, partially concealed by his jacket. Ice flooded her veins as she realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about white-collar crime anymore. Lives were at stake. In that moment, Emily made a split-second decision. She couldn't wait any longer. As soon as she was out of sight, she grabbed her phone and typed a quick message to Agent Thompson. "They're here, armed. Come now." The next few minutes felt like hours as Emily listened to the muffled voices from Michael's office, her heart racing. When she heard sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second, she knew it was time to act. Bursting into the office, Emily shouted, "The police are coming! You need to get out of here!" Michael and Ethan looked up in shock, their faces pale. "What? How?" Michael sputtered. "There's no time," Emily insisted, her voice frantic. "Go!" As the two men rushed past her, Emily's eyes met Michael's for a brief moment. In that instant, she saw confusion, fear, and the dawning realization of betrayal. Moments later, the penthouse was swarming with FBI agents. Emily watched in a daze as Michael and Ethan were led away in handcuffs, the evidence from the safe seized, and her world turned upside down. In the days that followed, the story broke across every major news outlet. Multi-million-dollar white-collar crime ring busted. The headlines screamed. Emily found herself at the center of a media storm, hailed as the brave whistleblower who had brought down a criminal empire. As she sat in a quiet cafe with Sarah, away from the prying eyes of reporters, Emily felt a mixture of relief, sadness, and uncertainty. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing her friend's hand. "Now, you rebuild. You're the strongest person I know, Em. You'll get through this." Emily nodded, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She thought about the life she had lost, the beautiful lie she had been living, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. But as she looked out at the city skyline, She felt a glimmer of hope. She had faced her fears, stood up for what was right, and emerged stronger. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but Emily knew she had the courage to walk it. As she raised her coffee cup in a silent toast to new beginnings, she felt, for the first time in months, a genuine smile spread across her face. The world of wealth and power she had known was gone, but in its place was something far more valuable: the truth and the freedom that came with it. Emily Carter had lost her fairy tale, but she had found herself, and that, she realized, was the greatest wealth of all. Epilogue. 1 year later, Emily stood at the podium of a packed auditorium, addressing a sea of eager faces. "Welcome to Ethics in Business and Finance," she began, her voice strong and clear. "In this course, we'll explore the importance of integrity in the world of high finance and the devastating consequences when that integrity is compromised." As she spoke, her eyes fell on a familiar face in the back of the room. Sarah gave her a thumbs up, grinning proudly. Beside her sat Agent Thompson, now a close friend and ally in Emily's new mission to educate and prevent future financial crimes. After the lecture, as Emily gathered her things, a young student approached her. "Professor Carter," the girl said hesitantly, "I read about what you did, exposing that crime ring. It must have been terrifying. How did you find the courage?" Emily smiled, remembering the fear, the doubt, and ultimately, the resolve that had driven her. "Sometimes," she replied, "courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when you're scared. It's about standing up for the truth, no matter the cost." As the student nodded and walked away, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. The past year had been challenging, filled with legal battles, emotional turmoil, and the difficult process of rebuilding her life. But standing here now, using her experience to educate and inspire others, she knew she had found her true calling. The glittering world of wealth and power she had once been a part of was behind her now. In its place was something far more valuable: purpose, integrity, and the knowledge that she had made a difference. As Emily left the auditorium and stepped out into the bright New York sunshine, she felt lighter than she had in years. The future stretched out before her, full of possibilities, and this time it was built on a foundation of truth, strength, and the unshakable belief that one person really could change the world.